KFUG Crescent City 101.1.
Good afternoon. This is Joan Miles welcoming you to Sunday Hymns and Conversation. This is KFUG Community Radio 101.1 FM. And you are now entering the spirituality zone. And what we mean by that is community spirit. We draw the community together to air people's views and concerns and achieve a spirit of cooperation. What I love about community radio is that we welcome input from all angles, which makes people feel they are considered part of the community and their input is important. Back in December 15, 2010, our wonderful triplicate editor, Richard Weens, wrote a great editorial entitled, "Start the Conversation." He said we need to find enough common ground to work together on the problems that face us, nationally and locally. The way to do that, he said, is to communicate and open our minds to viewpoints other than our own, rather than merely associating with those who already agree with us. So, to start the conversation today, our guest is Dr. Greg Duncan, who will update us on the Sutter hospital conflict. He has worked tirelessly to expose the illicit, dishonest dealings of Sutter Health in regards to Sutter Coast Hospital. His determination is amazing, and he has taken much of this burden on his own shoulders. He believes strongly in what he is doing, and he fully intends to prevail. According to Dr. Duncan, this injustice must be remedied. Welcome, Dr. Duncan.
Thank you. So the big picture here is about a corporation that decided to enact plans for our community that were not in the best interest of our community. Essentially, it's about money. It's about how Sutter Health has been trying to increase the amount of money that they take from our community for the provision of healthcare services. My role in this actually started when I was chief of staff, which is an elected position by other doctors at the hospital, to the board of directors. So I was a full voting board member at Sutter Coast Hospital and the only non-appointed member of the hospital board. So when you hear differences of opinion among other board members who actually have been very silent, but if you do hear from them, remember that they are all appointed by Sutter Health, and I was the only non-appointed director, and I was also the only director that chose not to sign Sutter Health's confidentiality agreement. And the reason I chose not to is because I was representing the doctors which had elected me to go to the boardroom and inform them of important issues that affected the care of their patients. So for me, this was ultimately about patient care. Also understand that for 19 years, I was a huge supporter of Sutter, and I would defend them. That was before I was in the boardroom. That's before I really knew what was going on. And I think it's also before Sutter really changed its corporate plans. Sutter Health System used to be a 24-hospital statewide system of locally owned hospitals, but they made a decision around 2008 to transfer ownership of those hospitals to regional corporations, to multi-hospital corporations, and dissolve the local boards of directors. So that's where I came into the picture when they had their vote in the boardroom to transfer ownership of Sutter Coast Hospital to a San Francisco-based corporation. I will fast forward at this point and let listeners know there's a really good ending here. They did not get the transfer of ownership through. They did not get their downsizing plans through. We're still holding them accountable to the IRS mandate that charities are supposed to operate exclusively for the public benefit. And I really, really appreciate the help from the community, the elected leaders in our community, the thousands of people that have come by my office and signed the petition. So I'll pause there at the beginning of the story and take any questions there may be.
When you say money,
Now, I want to do this, too, because we haven't introduced who else is speaking here. This is Sam Strait, who's become the man who gets things done here at KFUG. And then I'll be chiming in as well, and I'm Paul Kritz, the general manager of KFUG, just so you hear other voices talking to Dr. Duncan and we all know who we are. Okay, Sam, go right ahead.
so when you're talking about money, what happens to that money when it is received by Sutter Health? I mean,
So that's a great question. When the hospital was first formed in this county in 1985, having been given essentially by the healthcare district to Sutter to manage, the money was the property of the corporation of Sutter Coast Hospital. But one thing that the Sutter health attorneys did over a period of years was begin transferring from Sutter Coast Hospital Corporation to Sutter Health Corporation money and important powers that were locally held. And probably one of the most important ones came in the late 90s when the Sutter health attorneys wrote a bylaws change that allowed Sutter Health to take all the money, all the profits from Sutter Coast Hospital every 2 weeks and transfer it to Sacramento, where it became the property of Sutter Health. So all of Sutter Coast profits all of a sudden became the property of Sutter Health, leaving the local hospital with essentially one payroll. 2 weeks of operating cash is all we get. And that was a really important bylaws change that I really don't think the local board of directors even understood when they allowed it to happen.
I'm sorry. I want to understand the decision-making process in the boardroom, and we're talking about basically a hospital being locally owned, local corporation.
That's correct.
Okay. Then when Sutter Health makes these decisions to take, basically profits away and transfer them, how much is the local board involved in this decision-making?
So they have to approve the changes.
Mm-hmm.
But the dynamic of the boardroom is really important to understand.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very carefully orchestrated meeting that is pre-planned by Sutter Health attorneys and Sutter Health executives, two of which sit on the board.
Mm-hmm.
So they bring these agendas to the board, and internal documents that I do have will show that it's a very staged presentation to the
Okay.
local board. So most of the local people that go on the hospital board, they're going on that board to do the right thing, to be part of a charity. I really don't think they understand the 1,300 bylaws changes that they approved in one meeting in a 15-minute period.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is the kind of dynamic that goes on in the boardroom. It's all behind closed doors, no reporters, no witnesses. The meeting minutes are controlled by Sutter.
Mm-hmm.
They altered the meeting minutes in some cases.
After the fact?
Yes. They brought draft minutes. This is an interesting story, but we had a big meeting between the medical staff, which is all the doctors, and the board of directors when I was chief of staff.
Mm-hmm.
And the minutes that were generated from that meeting had a lot of concerns from the doctors about the downsizing plan, about Sutter Health's intent for our community. And the draft minutes came to the boardroom in the usual fashion, and they were quite good. They showed what the doctor's concerns were. The Sutter Health attorney, this is a man who is not on the board, wasn't present at the meeting where these minutes were taken, unilaterally took those minutes and deleted 65% of the material. And it was everything that the doctor said that was reflecting poorly on Sutter Health. So, that's just one episode. They've done it more than once, so that's probably the best example. So it gives the listeners an idea of the boardroom.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is controlled by Sutter Health attorneys and executives. And it was actually a prominent businessman in this town who told me all this when I first started on the hospital board. He said, and he actually resigned from the board after some conflict with the hospital board a number of years ago, and he said, just know this, Greg, all the decisions are made by the Sutter Health executives and attorneys, and you better accept that.
Wow.
Well, I didn't accept it, but I did learn it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that's interesting to see, because that's the ostensibly to have so much local involvement in owning and operating this hospital, but then really it sort of seems like it just becomes a rubber stamp function. Then you're given more than you could possibly deal with if you've got 1,300 bylaw changes to approve at one meeting, and you're just expected to kind of roll over and say yes.
That's exactly right. And here's another quick story. When I was on the board, I was removed from 2 meetings because I had a difference of opinion. And that is
Removed,
illegal.
like asked to leave, get up
Oh
and
yeah,
leave them?
yeah. I made a joke about it the second time. I said, "Do I have to arm wrestle Dr. Polidor and see who wins?" I looked around me, and it was like a scene from an old Jackie Chan movie. It was 20-1, so I decided the best thing to do was to go.
But the one usually wins in those instances, so you have to remember that.
I should, I was tempted to say something, but in the gravity of the situation, I quietly packed up my briefcase and left.
Wow.
And in my absence, the board told me that they were going to discuss legal strategies and they didn't want me to know what they were, which I can actually understand, but that's not what they did. What they did is they sent a letter to the City Council of Crescent City and they discussed public relations strategy in my absence. And I've had 4 attorneys tell me that's a gross violation of the Corporations Code. You cannot dismiss a director because he has a difference of opinion.
Yeah.
In my view, it's what makes a healthy board. And I think this is a problem that we see across the country. There's 2 kinds of boards. There's the rubber stamp boards that are controlled by the corporation, and then there are the boards where the local members raise their hands and ask questions, and they're encouraged to really understand what they're voting for. I can assure listeners that is not what happens at the boardroom of Sutter Coast Hospital.
Wow, okay.
But there's another kind of board, and that's one that we see fairly commonly in local politics, where board members are ill-equipped to deal with the information that they're presented with, and very often they're dealing with it on the basis of the fact that the staff that they've hired to do the nuts and bolts sort of work present them with some sort of a proposal, and then they, generally speaking, follow up on it. So in essence, when we're talking about boards and commissions, for instance, the Sutter Coast Board, there is really no local control over anything.
You don't know how important that statement you just made is, and I'll tell you why. When the 1300 bylaws changes were presented by the Sutter Health Attorney to the Board of Directors of Sutter Coast Hospital, he neglected to inform the Sutter Coast Board that they have a right to separate counsel. It's in the bylaws. One attorney is not allowed under the rules of the California State Bar to represent 2 parties during any issue where there may be a conflict of interest. And he was discussing basically setting up the hospital for transfer of ownership. But that's exactly what that attorney did. He represented 2 parties during an asset transfer and a dissolution of a board without notifying the weaker party, which, as you just said, is the local board. We're not attorneys. That the local board has a right to a separate attorney. So we filed a complaint, Dr. Caldwell and I, because the same thing happened when he was on the board, with the California State Bar, which oversees attorney conduct. Unfortunately, one of the attorneys in question is very, very heavily connected attorney. The State Bar said, well, you haven't shown us that there's a possibility of a difference of opinion, or that there's a possibility for conflict. And I said, I think dissolution of an entire corporation introduces an element of possible conflict. And in fact, the bylaws of Sutter Coast Hospital specifically mention that there can be conflict between the 2 corporations. We didn't ultimately prevail, but the other attorney, there were 2 attorneys, resigned from the board of Sutter Coast Hospital when this issue started to come to light. So we feel like it wasn't totally fruitless, but it was frustrating to see that, for example, the State Bar closed our claim initially without talking to me. And when he did talk to me after he closed the claim, he said he answered some of my questions on behalf of the Sutter attorneys without talking to them. And I said, sir, how is it that you would know the answer to a question of someone that you're purportedly investigating, or at least looking into? And he said, I've been in this business for so long, I know how attorneys will answer. So that's your State Bar.
So in essence, we've got this huge corporation that basically dictates our health scenario to us and sits back and collects enormous sums of money from that activity that doesn't stay here locally for the most part. It ends up back at corporate headquarters, so to speak. And how are we talking about any kind of satisfactory health situation or health climate here in Delaware County. It seems like we're being yanked around on a rope all over the place.
It's another wonderful observation, and I'm going to introduce a concept that was taught to me by Professor Alan Enthoven, who is an emeritus professor at Stanford University. He's a nationally recognized expert on healthcare policy. And he and I have been collaborating, and what he shared was Sutter Health is able to charge 60% over market rates by virtue of using hospitals like Sutter Coast Hospital, which has a monopoly privilege essentially in this county. There's no hospital for 90 minutes in any direction, to leverage higher charges throughout the Sutter system. And the way that they introduced that was by placing what are called all or none clauses in their contracts with insurance companies. So if an insurance company goes to Sutter and they want to do business with them, they can't say, according to Professor Enthoven, well, we just want your monopoly hospital. We don't want to deal with you in the Bay Area. We have other hospitals there that are competing well, and we'll stick with them. No, it's all or none. So they can leverage the power of the sole community provider hospital, which is an official designation. There are 5 of those in the Sutter system. And they can leverage that monopoly power throughout the rest of the Sutter system. So we become much more important than $10.8 million in profit in 2014 system-wide.
Wow, that's interesting. Before I get to, I want to resist also just for my own edification. Before I want to resist getting into the minutia of the legal things that have happened back before. So, transfer of ownership that has failed. That went to the courts and failed. Correct?
Well, it was litigated in the Hussey case, sort of abstractly, I think, but the settlement was sealed.
Okay.
What we do know is that Sutter has announced publicly that they have no plans at this time to try to transfer ownership of Sutter Coast Hospital out of the community.
Okay. So take us back then, if you would. At what point did you first hear of Sutter's plans to downsize Sutter Coast?
So the downsizing plans came in around the middle of 2012, I would say. And I have all the meeting minutes and the records. And if any of your listeners ever wants to know more or get into some more documents, I'm happy to release what I can. But it was around that time. And because of the community opposition, Sutter decided that they needed to take a step back from the critical access designation, which would have eliminated 50% of our acute care beds, increased our number of emergency transfers, and essentially tripled prices for Medicare patients at Sutter Coast Hospital. And those are all from documents that Sutter released. So there's no doubt about the impact. We also know nationally that critical access hospitals have higher mortality rates. They have less robust quality reporting requirements, and that's been the subject of some recent articles in the Wall Street Journal. At any rate, around the middle of 2013, they finally got their hospital study going, and they asked some community members to join the study. They did not ask them to sign a confidentiality agreement as a precursor to joining the study. And this came up yesterday with a forum with a supporter of Martha McClure's who said, no, to join that study, you had to sign the agreement right off the bat. So I went home last night and I have the document, and that's absolutely not true. But at any rate, the community members were basically used in the same way that the board of directors is used. They are subjected to a very carefully crafted presentation, the facts of which in some cases are blatantly false, like the hospital profit and the hospital census data. And then they were asked to vote on critical access at the end of the study, which, according to the triplicate and according to a voice recording that I have, they all did. But I don't really blame the local people, because I know how good Sutter is at convincing some local people to rubber stamp what Sutter wants to do. It worked on me for a while. So,
how so? How would that? How do you think they could sway local folks when given this price? I mean, they have the power because they're coming with all the information that this decision is going to be based upon. So that's
right.
The first place.
So here's a good example. Sutter went to the steering committee and to the public, and they said, we're looking at multi-million-dollar losses every year for the next 5 years. If we don't do critical access, this hospital's going to fold. You're not going to have a hospital here. Now, we know that those projections were way off, and in fact, in 2014, when they were supposedly losing millions, they actually made 10.8. But that's a very powerful argument.
Sure.
You know, if we don't have another hospital here, Martha McClure's made that argument. She said, I look around, I want to live here the rest of my life, and I want there to be a hospital. There will be a hospital in Del Norte County. And Mike Cohill, who is the regional president of Sutter at the time this is going on. So he's the boss of the local CEO. He's basically the number 2 guy in the organization as far as Sutter concerns Del Norte. And he said in a recorded meeting with the medical staff, this is what's nice about this meeting. I can tell you what I'm telling you right now. He said, basically, if we as a hospital don't go along with Sutter Health's plans, they may just go broke and close the hospital. I mean, that's a really powerful statement. That is, to me, that's undue influence. And I told him at a subsequent board meeting, this is the next board meeting. Now, I'm not allowed to tell you what he said at that meeting, but I'll tell you what I said. I said, if you want to follow through with your promise or threat to close the hospital, would you mind not locking the front door so I don't have to get a locksmith to come back in the next day to reopen it? Because this hospital is going to stay open. I have talked to executives from several healthcare systems, and they all love our market. It's a monopoly market. What's not to love? But I would not accept those threats of hospital closure, and I still don't. And I'll play that tape for anybody that wants to hear it.
Wow.
Where does the study or the information come from that makes them think that they were going to lose that kind of money? I mean, what basis do they have for making those statements?
I would love to have you with me on the hospital board, because that's the kind of question that never gets asked. But the answer is it all comes from Sutter Health, from attorneys, from consultants, from public relations people.
But I mean, we have local people that in some cases we elect in other forms of leadership throughout the county, and I mean, pretty clearly they can't all be stupid. So I mean, I'm coming from the standpoint of not knowing a whole lot, but yet there seems to be questions in the air that are so obvious that, I mean, how can you not ask those questions?
So you basically say, I mean, why did the local
What
control
happened there?
why were they asleep at the wheel? Were they just inundated, overwhelmed? I mean, did they drop the ball as far as the responsibility that they have to be a part of this board?
So to answer your question, I would have to speculate. So I'm not going to do that, but I'll just tell you the facts. All the board members are appointed by Sutter Health. They all sign confidentiality agreements. They're sitting in a boardroom with a very prominent attorney from Sutter Health who makes it clear that nothing's supposed to leave the boardroom. And so the data never got out to the community, and I don't think they feel very comfortable about the whole situation. I've asked several of them, you know, can we just have a back and forth publicly? I've asked the CEO of the hospital, who's on the hospital board. He promised to come back and talk about hospital finances. He later changed his mind, refused to do so. But the question you asked was, well, why don't the other board members just go do what I did? And Kevin Caldwell did, but again, he's elected by the medical staff. He's not an appointee to the board. So I guess I would finish by saying I would love to hear the answer to your question from the people who have chosen to remain silent and to not bring any questions out to the public. I would love to know the answer to that.
I mean, in essence, you're saying we have no protection whatsoever from this kind of activity. I mean, I see it so often when you attend common garden variety boards and commissioners meetings where they don't ask such obvious questions. It's almost like there's an elephant in the room and everybody's ignoring it. I mean, I don't know how that's a possibility, because in theory, these people are supposed to be looking out for us.
Yeah, and I actually thought of another answer that I can tell you, because it's on that same tape that has Mike Cohill on it that I just talked about. And it's a board member of Sutter Coast Hospital in the middle of this big meeting with the medical staff and the Sutter Health executives and the board say, and I'm quoting, "I'm sorry, it was too scary to lose a hospital." That was one of our local board members that said that. So I mean, I think in her case anyway, that was That was a significant motivation. She basically bought the threat, in my view, it was a threat that Sutter Health would just close the hospital and Del Norte County would no longer have an acute care hospital. That's a powerful incentive.
Kind of strong arming like that. That's wow.
Right.
Well, I mean, how does Sutter Health even have that kind of power?
Well, that's another question. I mean, in 2014, I looked up their balance sheet. They have 4.2 at the time. Anyway, they had $4.2 billion in short-term assets. I mean, they are a massive company with teams of lawyers. And if we get into the details later, I can tell you a little bit about what happened to me when I spoke up. And it's cost me a lot in my own legal expenses to successfully defend. But, I wouldn't believe it if I didn't sit there, is what I'd tell you. It's just the whole thing is just beyond my belief. It almost still is.
And this is one part of it that I'd like to know more about. The things that you can and cannot say. I mean, we're talking about healthcare. We're talking about running our hospital. First off, the question is, why are there things that you can and cannot say? And then what are the things that you can or cannot say? How have you been sort of hemmed in as far as disclosures go?
So the Sutter Health attorneys set up 2 meetings with me privately when I first went on the board, and they went over that. And initially, the attorney said, I'm sitting down with you as an employed attorney of Sutter Health. I don't represent you, Greg. You need to know that.
Wow, so right there, it's confrontational in a sense.
Well, but it was good in a way because he said, and I said, so can I tell you something in confidence? And he said, no, you cannot. I will take anything you tell me, and I will take it to Sutter Health because that's who employs me.
Yeah.
And what he said was I couldn't share any trade secrets. And the specific example he gave was if Sutter Health buys a piece of property somewhere, and they're planning on building a surgery center. Mm-hmm. I can't spread that around or act on that and buy an adjacent piece of property, for example, because it may go up in value. I totally get that.
Sure.
That's a trade secret, and I would always respect that.
That's akin to insider trading. That's akin to having, some sort of knowledge that you would profit that, everybody else doesn't have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But my point was being able to share important board actions with the medical staff that would impact the community. For
Who
example,
elected you to be on the...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the best examples was Mike Cohill, again, this Sutter Health regional president at the time, the boss of the local CEO, proposed that we consider closing the obstetric service at Sutter Coast Hospital, which would be devastating. Mm-hmm. Then there wouldn't be a place for people to go to have babies. So I waited a week before I told the medical staff because I thought, maybe he's bluffing. And I even said that. I said, Mike, if this is a serious proposal, we really need to have a talk about this before it goes any further because this is really serious. He said, it's a serious proposal. And he directed the CEO of the hospital to do a study on the financial aspects of that. How much money were we losing doing OB is basically the way he worded it. And I waited because I thought, he probably was just saying this out of emotion. So to be fair, I'll wait. The next week, they called a special meeting to discuss this possible closure of the obstetric service. At that point, I notified the medical staff because I said, now this has gone way too far.
Yeah.
Now, the CEO of the hospital, Linda Horn, then sent a letter to the entire medical staff that said I made the whole thing up. There was never any discussion, no discussion of closure. And I said in an email to Linda, do you mind if I share the invitation to the meeting that you sent me, the title of which is the OB service, the only special meeting that we ever called when I was on the board? Well, she didn't answer my email. But she successfully, I think, through that false information to the medical staff, she probably created some doubt in the minds of some of the doctors as to whether I was saying was true or not. And I'll swear on a stack of Bibles, plus I have the documents that show that special meeting took place. Ultimately, they decided not to close the OB service, and I think in part because the medical staff was really upset about it. That's my job. If something like that is going to happen to the community, I'm going to tell the doctors, and I did. And I waited a week to do so to make sure they were serious about this meeting. So that was basically the parameter of confidentiality in my view, and still is just like you said, the insider trading analogy. I would also say the following meeting that I had with the same exact attorney who was basically trying to convince me to sign this confidentiality agreement, I said, well, can I share some? There was a big article in the newspaper around that time. And I said, can I share something with you? And he goes, well, sure you can. I'm your attorney. This is the guy that told me
Before
the month
yeah,
before that he
yeah.
represented Sutter Health.
Wow.
That was his last face-to-face meeting with me. He resigned from the board not from the board, but as the attorney who is assigned to the board.
Uh-huh.
Never to be seen again in this county. And that's just wrong. You cannot tell somebody two different things about representation when you're an attorney. And anybody out there who knows about anything about attorneys knows this. Representation and disclosure are just absolutely basic to being an attorney. You're either somebody's attorney or you're not.
Yeah, and that governs every subsequent syllable that you share with anybody is that status. That's it. How have they come back at you?
So, and I will back up just a tiny bit. Okay. So after they went public with their false information, the CEO of the hospital went to the Board of Supervisors and said some things that were not true about what was going on in the boardroom. I decided to come forward with factual information. So they say, oh, he's this whistleblower guy. He just goes out and spills all this facts. That's not the sequence, and it's provable. I have all the documents. And some of the things that they said, just to give a couple examples, they made false statements.
Is this Linda in front of the Board of Supervisors? Or
that would have been Eugene Souksy.
Okay.
So this was February 28th of 2012. This is the very beginning.
Not supervisors, right?
Before the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah,
it's a recorded meeting. You can actually go on the website and you can see what he said, and I'll tell you what part of it's false if you want. But anyway, they made a lot of false statements to the community. I have about 100 documented false statements by Sutter Health executives to hospital staff, doctors, community leaders. They were operating illegally without a chief financial officer for a 2.5-year period. Corporations Code requires you have a CFO. They were operating without one. I brought this up. I published it online. We still didn't have a CFO till the very end of 2013. And the 2.5-year period that they were operating illegally is the only 2.5-year period in the 30-year history of the hospital where they've ever claimed to have lost money.
Wow.
So the other thing I tried to do during this time is I wanted to see the books of the hospital. And it's the absolute right of every director to view the hospital books and records at any reasonable time. They put stipulations on who I could see them with. They brought in John Gates, who was actually the regional CFO. He's the chief financial officer for the entire Sutter West Bay region, and they said, you can sit down with this guy. But one of the finance people in the hospital offered to sit down with me, and she knew the numbers, and she really knew where everything was. And I said, great, I'd like to do that, but the Sutter Health attorneys and executives said there's no way that meeting's going to happen, so it never did. So what did they do to me? So, basically, when this all started, they launched a series of investigations into my medical practice. So for 19 years, never had anything going on. I mean, just very placid relationship. But all of a sudden, investigation after investigation, one of which was coordinated by a former special FBI agent that Sutter brought up from Sacramento on very short notice. And it's kind of an interesting story. The hospital compliance officer, so the compliance officer is the Sutter Health employee who goes around to all of the Sutter Coast employees and the doctors and investigates them for whatever. So he came to my office with a letter that said I had 2 hours to respond to a meeting invitation, I'll call it an invitation, with this former FBI special agent, whose title in the Sutter Health system is Director of Special Projects. So I had 2 hours to respond, and the meeting was going to take place the next day.
Wow.
And I didn't come to the desk. I was actually doing a procedure. But he was so angry, and his behavior was so aggressive that a peace officer who was in my waiting room obviously didn't know the background of what I'm saying now, but he saw this tall gentleman who was acting very aggressively to my staff, and he later told me, I stayed in your office because I thought he was a threat to your staff. And he had no idea the background. He described the guy perfectly, 6'2", dark hair with a Sutter badge on. There's no question who it was. And the same person actually submitted a court document on my behalf testifying to what I just told you. And we presented that to a judge in Superior Court of this county during the Hussey litigation. So at that point, I realized this has gotten pretty serious. And I hired an attorney. He showed them that their meeting was inappropriate, illegal, not consistent with California law or the hospital bylaws. And he wrote the Sutter Health investigator a letter. And I think they had 2 attorneys, 2 investigators. I think there were 5 people involved in this. And he said, I noticed that Brian Callahan, your director of special projects, appears to have made Dr. Duncan a special project. What I don't know is what that special project is.
That was my question, is what were they investigating?
So what they were trying to show was HIPAA violations. That's usually how they get people. And usually it's by, somebody faxes a lab result to the wrong fax number or something, which is, it's a mistake, but it's a HIPAA violation. So HIPAA law is very broad, and they were trying to find evidence that I had leaked or somehow mishandled private health information, which I've never done in my life. And I'm probably the most careful person, or among the most careful on the medical staff, and I've never had a HIPAA violation. And a lot of the other doctors can't say that, but those, generally they're minor. And a lot of their HIPAA violations through the same compliance officer were really inappropriate too. But I just didn't lay down. I'm not going to let them slap that on me. So we defeated them again.
And this is the kind of thing that, regardless of how it comes out, I mean, you say you defeated them with that. I mean, that's sort of, it goes on your permanent record, right? This is a stain that could remain with you professionally.
It could have, except that they had to withdraw the record because it was done illegally. They had to actually remove all the letters. But it's interesting you say that, because it turns out there's more than one set of files on doctors at Sutter Coast Hospital. What? I never knew this for 20 years. I thought there was a file, right? And if there was disciplinary action, it goes in your file.
Yeah.
Well, I went in to look at my file, and I found a whole bunch of things that they had actually put in there illegally, all of which I had removed. I went back like 2 weeks later to look at the file, and they said, "Oh, we shredded your whole file." I said, "You shredded my file. Why did you do that?" "Oh, it's part of a conversion from paper records over to computer records." I said, "It looks like paper to me." But anyway, they shredded the file. They then removed some of those letters and put them into a new file type. It's called an MEC correspondence file. It's a file type I'd never heard of. And I think those letters are still there, but they won't let me look at them. They will not let me look at my own file at Sutter Coast Hospital.
Huh. Subsequent other investigations, other strong-arm things to sort of get you to shut up?
I think another interesting one was I had a patient who I thought might have a blood clot, which is a life-threatening condition. So I sent him over to the emergency room, to the radiology suite. I sent him to the ER suite with an order to check for a blood clot. And they refused to honor the order. And instead, they sent him to the emergency room, and they said, we're going to have to evaluate you here first. They charged him $5,000. They delayed his care. And finally, they got the test, like 5 hours later. And it was positive for a massive blood clot. That patient could have died in the time.
You're talking minutes. And
Right, exactly. And we hear stories about when blood clots embolize, they become fatal within minutes. So he complained to the hospital, and the internal investigators at the hospital sent him a letter that said, well, it was Dr. Duncan's fault. He wasn't available. He was nowhere to be seen. I was in my office during daytime business hours when I sent him over there, and I have a cell phone 24/7, but I was in my office at the time. So he said, I don't accept your investigation about Dr. Duncan. It's bogus, and I'm tired of you besmirching his reputation. So they said, okay, we'll look into it again. And then ultimately, he went to the California Department of Public Health and filed an official complaint. And they cited Sutter Coast Hospital for a violation of patient rights. And that's a public citation, so I can tell you about that. But it really gets hard when you're trying to see patients and do surgery and take good care of people to have to deal with these false investigations. And ultimately, I don't know what my future here will be in terms of how many years I stay, but I do want the story to be told so that other people maybe realize they don't have to roll over, and patients ultimately will benefit.
Wow. All right, well, let's take a quick break. Let's do an underwriting announcement or two and a promo, since those people help pay our bills here at KFUG. And then we'll be right back talking to Dr. Greg Duncan, orthopedic surgeon and chief of surgery at Sutter Coast Hospital. And sounds like the biggest problem Sutter Health has. But we'll be back to continue the conversation with Dr. Duncan shortly.
Del Norte Unified School District wants to hear from you. We need to improve the quality of our local schools and demand educational excellence. 80% of students graduating from high school in Del Norte are not ready for entrance into a California university. Building healthy communities, Del Norte needs you to join the conversation. Learn more about upcoming parent engagement sessions and share your feedback. Join the movement and hold our elected school board accountable. They work for us. Hashtag Engage Del Norte. Hashtag Del Norte Dreams. Paid for by the California Endowment.
For millions of motorists over the years, the towering smile of Paul Bunyan in Klamath has been their welcome to Del Norte County. The Trees of Mystery, owned and operated by the Thompson family, is a truly singular attraction that has entertained and enriched locals and tourists for nearly 70 years. While the Trees of Mystery celebrates the natural splendor and logging heritage of Del Norte County, it also houses the End of the Trail Museum, one of the most extensive private collections of Native American artifacts in the country. The collection was a particular passion of Thompson family matriarch Marilee Smith, and one of the many ways she spent her life giving back to our community. It is in memory of Marilee that KFUG would like to thank the Thompsons of Klamath for their continued support of community radio in Del Norte. Thanks for supporting KFUG.
What would a teenager who is frustrated and concerned about the direction our country is heading do with a 2-hour radio show? That's a good question. On my show, I talk about political topics, social issues, recent news, and everything in between. I also play a little bit of music. If you're tired of your average political talk show that only bashes on Republicans or only on Democrats, then I would encourage you to tune into my show, because neither party is safe from my criticism. I believe our nation is facing great issues, and both Republicans are responsible for the mess that we're in. If you've ever wondered what a teenager likes to complain about politically, then I'm the show for you. Tune in for the T-Smash Show every Monday from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock at 101.1 FM or online at kfugradio.org. I am T-Smash, and I approve this message.
You're listening to KFUG 101.1 FM, online, kfugradio.org. It is 17 minutes to 4, and the show that you've tuned into, of course, is Sunday Afternoon Hymns and Conversation with Joan Miles. And Joan's guest today, Dr. Greg Duncan, orthopedic surgeon, chief of surgery at Sutter Coast Hospital. We all know who Dr. Duncan is and why he's famous today. So thanks for coming in and talking with us, Dr. Duncan. So let's continue on now. At what point did Sutter Health withdraw their critical access plans?
So that was just this year.
Yeah.
The application initially sat in limbo for about 2 years, actually, until Roger Gitlin, and you know, people get on me for crediting Roger Gitlin, but it is a fact. Roger Gitlin was very instrumental in getting that application pulled because he kept following up with California Department of Public Health, and basically his point was, look, CDPH. Critical access is either good for the community and it should be approved, or it is not and it should be denied. But you're allowing Sutter Health to leave that application in limbo for 2 years. Mm-hmm. Which one is it? And that's when finally the Sutter Coast Board directed Mitch Hanna, the CEO, to send a letter to California Department of Public Health to rescind the application. Now, Mitch reported to the newspaper that the application expired. It did not expire. That was the problem. It didn't have an expiration date. But it was rescinded by a vote of the board of directors. Mm-hmm. And that gives me hope, getting back to Sam's question earlier on the board of directors, that that was in the community interest to take that application back, and I'm proud of them for doing it.
How much input do you think, though, that the community involvement on the board of directors had with that?
I always see things through rose-colored lenses.
That's what I was, yeah.
But I think, I would love to be in the board meeting and find out, but I don't think I'll be going back there anytime soon. I applied, actually, for board membership. But,
did you really?
I did. Well, I just thought, diversity of opinion was good, but
yeah.
I didn't carry the day.
I can't imagine why.
So who of our local leadership have aided in this process?
I mean, because it's been a groundswell. I mean, everybody here in town, you have to have an opinion about the hospital, about Sutter Health, and I've yet to meet the person who goes, I'm all for Sutter Health. So yeah, exactly. So I mean, it obviously resonated very well here in Del Norte County. Who's aided and abetted?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I really I thank you for giving me so much credit, but actually it was the outside agencies, the Joint Commission cited Sutter Health. Medicare made them change a false statement on their Medicare application, and more than anything, the local community outpouring of support was tremendous. 4,500 signatures, on my petition opposing Sutter's plans. The Board of Supervisors, the City Council, Healthcare District, United Indian Health Service was huge. They submitted a court declaration on behalf of 7 Native American nations to the litigation that was opposing Sutter. So they were huge. Smith River Rancheria, the sheriff, the DA, the Senior Center, Chamber of Commerce, the Board of Realtors. I couldn't have been happier. I mean, that's really why I was continuing and am continuing to do this, is because of the support. It's been, virtually universal, and I really tried hard not to let any politics ever enter into that, but there became a point when I was on the board of directors that one of the supervisors' behavior was such that I felt like I needed to question it and let people know what was going on. So I did, but that was one, and only one, that hasn't been helping us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now you're talking about Martha McClure, right?
I sure am.
Okay. Tell us then your version of this. What happened? What didn't she do?
Yeah, well,
because we've got to ask her these things.
Yeah,
She's
my
up for
version,
election.
and I'll get as much detail as I can because I have documents that prove it. So when I was on the hospital board of directors, I was sent an email from a Sutter Health executive notifying us that Martha McClure was working on a committee with these Sutter folks. It was a committee to select the ultimate consultant for the hospital study. And Martha had also been working with us on a healthcare district committee opposing Sutter Health. So I was alarmed. Mm-hmm. And I called Martha, and basically...
Why? Because you saw her on both sides?
Yeah,
of the
I wanted
fence?
to know what was going on. I mean, I wanted to know, was this an official appointment by the Board of Supervisors? I mean, I just want to know, and I want to know if it was true. Mm-hmm. I wanted to know if this Sutter Health executive was accurate and maybe was just making something up about Martha. So I went to the source, and ultimately I wrote a letter to Martha about that as well. And she claimed that the Board of Supervisors had officially appointed her to this committee to work with the Sutter people.
A committee? I mean, under what? So an ad hoc committee? Was it just as part of the healthcare district, or was it part of the Board of Supervisors? I don't understand.
It was a Sutter-formed committee, the purpose of which was to select the consultant who would ultimately do the hospital study. Mm-hmm. So it was called the Sutter Selection Committee.
Okay, and had Sutter asked the Board of Supervisors to appoint somebody?
They asked Mike Sullivan.
Okay.
We sent a request to Mike Sullivan, and it just sort of evaporated, and then Martha McClure's name showed up. So I wanted to figure out, because we as a board of directors, me included, had asked for Mike Sullivan, and I didn't know what was going on. I don't know if anyone else did, but I sure didn't. So that's when I contacted Mike and Martha, and I sent a letter just kind of asking if it's an official appointment, when did it happen, and was it agendized, and what was the vote? Mm-hmm. And 3 other supervisors told me it never happened. And it wasn't on the meeting agenda of any of the meetings during that time of the Board of Supervisors, the appointment. And it wasn't in the meeting record. I mean, it wasn't. There was no trace of it. And then Martha became very angry, some of which she displayed publicly.
I just want to stop. So it almost sounds like Martha was opening Mike's mail and answering this. I mean, how did her name just show up out of the blue?
So that's a great question. A better one probably for Mike than me. I don't know how that transfer took place exactly, but what I wanted to know is, did the Board of Supervisors, as an elected body, appoint Martha McClure to the Sutter Selection Committee as Martha told me they had?
And they hadn't.
And so she resigned at that point. She stepped off the committee, and then she resurfaced in a different committee later on as an individual, which she's allowed to do. I mean, she joined the Sutter Camden study, which was the next committee that Sutter formed as an individual. Mm-hmm. And that's where she voted for critical access, according to the triplicate article and according to the meeting recording that I have in my possession.
And she has not come out on record as saying she did or did not, right? Is she saying she's
no, actually nobody ever disputed the newspaper article. There were about, I think, 13 to 15 people that made it through the end of the Camden study, and not one of them has ever disputed that. Okay. If they want to dispute the triplicate, that would be helpful, because the triplicate is quoting an executive from the Camden group in the triplicate report on that vote, and they use the word vote. And they say during the last vote there was I don't have it in front of me, but it was something to the effect, during the last vote there was unanimous consensus that we should stick with Sutter Health and pursue critical access, something to that effect. And it's in the triplicate and available online.
Okay.
But it's been reported in the triplicate in some of the letters to the editor by various people, not Martha McClure, of course, that Martha wasn't involved in that vote and didn't make that vote for critical access.
Yeah, so I'd love to see Martha come out and dispute that, because that would be different than what the hospital CEO told us in a recorded meeting, and she was on that committee. And it would also be different than the triplicate report. Because that committee met in secret, I guess ultimately maybe only those 14 people know, but one of those people in a recording said it was unanimous for critical access.
Okay. Well, if you're interested and you'd like to follow along, Martha McClure will be our guest on Community Service this next Friday at noon, and that's just one question that I have for her then. I ask you about that. Okay, so I have a large thing that I want to get into, but it might be beyond the purview of this conversation, about the place of corporatism and healthcare, and trying to run a hospital in a small community like this. Along the lines, or having a very large corporation trying to run a small hospital here, and the transition from things like boardrooms and minutes and nonprofit profits and all of this big stuff that happens, and it's sort of bloodless, and it's higher up, and then trying to transition all of this down to just boots on the ground, providing health care for people in a community like this. Do you have an opinion about this, about the role of money in healthcare? In a hospital in Delaware County?
Yeah, well, I do. And there are different healthcare systems that do things very differently. The Mayo Clinic system is one of the finest integrated healthcare systems in the world. Asante Healthcare in Medford, Oregon is consistently found to be one of the highest in terms of quality. And I think you need to be part of that. I think the complexities of Medicare, the Affordable Care Act, I absolutely think you need to be part of a system. In fact, when they did the Camden study, they paid money to the consultants to look at the question of a freestanding hospital, and I said, nobody in this room wants that. Don't even spend a dime on that, because nobody in the world wants that. We need to be part of a system. The question is which system. And I think the irony here is that we don't fit Sutter's business model, and they still won't let us go. And the reason I think this is because Mike Cohill told us this. They are urban-centric, Sutter Health is. We are rural, so we don't fit their business model. And this is also on the audio tape that I can play for people. He specifically said, you should contact the Adventists, for example, because this is what they specialize in, rural health care. That's what you are. You should go talk to them and maybe get them in here. And we said, thank you, Mike. We appreciate that. So when I started going to other healthcare systems and seeing what their level of interest was, it wasn't on my doing. It was Mike Cohill, regional president, boss of the hospital CEO, who told us to do that in a recorded meeting. I think some of the people in town think I just took it upon myself to start calling CEOs, which I didn't do. But I was very pleased with the response. I mean, it was uniformly positive. And I really think there is a better partner for Crescent City, one that's in our region, maybe Asante. Yeah. I mean, Asante has publicly stated in the front page of the triplicate that they're interested in a closer affiliation. Roy Vineyard, who's the CEO of Asante, has talked to me 25 times, and I have a voicemail on my email where he says, I tried to call the Camden people to discuss pursuing this potential affiliation, and they didn't return my phone call. And
why hasn't that happened?
Because the board of directors hasn't invited him. See, the board of directors controls, and Sutter Health ultimately is controlling the hospital. It's locally owned, it's controlled by Sutter through those bylaws changes, but if they don't invite him, at one point it was very interesting actually. Roy Vineyard told me and Dwayne Reichland, who was on the healthcare district, is still, and my wife on a telephone conference, that he was just going to come out to the hospital. He said, I just want to come out and meet you guys. I just want to walk around the hospital, and you can give me a tour. You're on the board, right? You can walk through I said, sure I can, Roy. I'd be happy to. But I think at that point he contacted Sutter, and then he ultimately said, I'm really sorry to have promised I was going to come out there, but I can't tell you all the reasons, but I can't come.
Why then won't Sutter Health let us go?
So a lot of theories. I think one is this leveraging higher prices throughout the Sutter system, I think is an important one. And actually what an executive at another healthcare system told me, he said, egos have now started to take over at Sutter Health. And I can't say his name, but I think he was really insightful. He said, sometimes people in leadership positions start to make decisions not based on logic, but on emotion. And he said, I really think that's what's happening.
Wow. Well, so what do you do in the face of something like that?
Well,
how do you stand up to something that's basically irrational? If it's a power thing, if it's a threat, if it's a defensive reaction, and so that's why they're holding on, then how do you stand up with logic and say it's in your best interest to let this go?
And we thought I think we came really, really close to getting there.
Really?
But my sense was there was an impediment at the highest level of Sutter Health, which would be the CEO of the corporation. That's my sense. Mike Coyle was very blunt. He directed us to talk to competing healthcare systems to come out here and think about taking over the hospital. That is a pretty powerful statement. But ultimately, the organization comes down to the Sutter Health Board in terms of directing the regional president, directing the attorneys, the attorney executives, and directing the local CEO as to what they're going to do. And, it's sort of like let my people go. A lot of people have brought that analogy here. Why won't they let us go?
So we have no path to moving. So we have no path from moving away from Sutter Health.
I think the path is to expand care where Sutter isn't meeting our needs, to provide good service at lower prices, and then ultimately, I think Sutter will see that their business model isn't perfect for our area, and I think they will probably let us go. But I don't know this. It's been 4 years, so.
How can that happen if Sutter Coast doesn't come on board with that kind of a?
Yeah, in a monopoly, how do you offer?
How do you get away from them?
It can only happen through Sarah Crevens, who is the new CEO of Sutter Health. And it's not going to happen now because the healthcare district already sent a letter to Sarah Crevens asking for a meeting, just to talk. And she didn't answer the letter. So it's not going to happen now. But I look at things over long periods of time.
Wow. Okay, so what do we as a community do then? And let me do this while I'm thinking about it. We're 2 minutes to 4. You're tuned into KFUG LP Crescent City. There's the legal ID. What can we do as a community to not fall asleep on this issue? Because I'm sorry, but it almost feels like I get the feeling, Sutter Health is going sort of judo on us. And they're just going, okay, well, we're not doing this now. And they're waiting until things would, quiet down and then maybe push in the same direction again. What can we do to be vigilant?
So the healthcare district of Del Norte County is an elected body of 5 people. And they have some statutory authority over healthcare. They have the right to eminent domain, for example.
And the makeup of that committee, is it like the Solid Waste Management Authority? Is it 2 and 2 and 1?
No, it's actually 5 elected people to a separate government body. Healthcare districts exist throughout California.
Okay,
so,
so they're not appointed. It's not like having
Like
gotcha.
the Harbor District.
Okay, right.
No, they're all elected, and they're all energized about this, and they meet the 4th Tuesday of every month. So I would really encourage people to come to those meetings or contact the healthcare district and offer their support for what they're trying to do. And they are on the verge of potentially signing a contract with a consulting group called Quorum Health Resources. And Quorum Health Resources manages hospitals all across the United States. The healthcare district's talking to them about a request for proposal. That's going to be a public document posted on the healthcare district's website. It's going to be up for discussion the 4th Tuesday of this month, and it's an important step because that will put the healthcare district in touch with a nationally recognized healthcare firm that can help them meet the needs that Sutter isn't meeting.
Interesting. So what happens then if the healthcare district finds somebody? How is it possible to just move Sutter out?
Well, it's possible to have, for example, 2 clinics, and it's possible to have
just
a surgery.
to set up a alongside thing.
Sure.
That breaks up the whole, that's not a monopoly anymore,
Exactly.
and the business model changes for them. Then.
Yeah, it changes dramatically, especially if they follow through with their consideration of a surgery center. That would be really good for the people of Del Norte County.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have to go to Mad River Hospital 80 miles for people with private insurance that are paying Sutter's exorbitant fees. I could do them at the surgery center here. So that would be a really important addition.
It would be independent then of Sutter Coast, the
Oh, sure, yeah.
surgery center.
Absolutely.
Who would front it? I mean, money-wise.
The healthcare district.
And they have that kind of resource?
They have a fair bit of resources, actually, but they also have the ability to take out almost zero interest loans, and they've done it. They built the huge clinic on the corner of Washington and Northcrest, by far the biggest medical clinic in the county. It's successful, it makes money, and they're looking to expand that. In fact, the way that building was built was to allow for expansion off of one side of the building, and they've got additional acreage adjacent to it. So they have the property, they have money. Now they have a consultant.
So in a way, it's like moving backwards in a sense. We're coming back to a healthcare district running, managing healthcare in Del Norte County, just as it was with Seaside, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's going back to the model of local input, local oversight, elected people having a say in your healthcare. Wow. Very different model.
So they can pick off little bits and pieces from what Sutter Health offers at the hospital and put them in a position of competition as opposed to this monopoly scenario.
They could pick off big pieces. They could have a portable MRI scanner in here in a month if they want it to happen. So yeah, there's plenty of opportunity, and they're looking at the specifics. I'm not privy to all of those. I just know what the possibilities are. But yeah, it's not even nibbling around the edge at a certain point. You put a surgery center in, that is a major addition to a healthcare community.
So with the level of angst that the local population is showing with respect to Sutter Health, they are moving forward. They're
Sutter Health or the healthcare district?
The healthcare district.
Oh, they're moving forward, yeah.
And we may see something like that in the near future.
I think it's virtually a certainty that at the next meeting you'll see something. I mean, that's just my read as a public member at the last healthcare district meeting. They called a special meeting earlier this month, and they notified the public of what they're considering doing at the meeting at the end of this month.
Whole different staff, whole different set of equipment.
In terms of what they would bring?
Yeah, what they would bring to their, a whole new facility.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it would be completely set. Well, Sutter hasn't answered their request to have a talk, so at that point, you really can't collaborate. When Sarah Crevens, the CEO of Sutter Health, does not answer a letter signed by the healthcare district asking for a conversation, I think your likelihood of a successful collaboration is very low.
And we have the ability to pursue this without any repercussions from Sutter Health then.
Oh, they have no say. In fact, that was the one good thing about the first litigation is it dissolved any non-compete clause that the healthcare district used to be bound by.
Oh, wow,
there's no non-compete clause anymore. So your questions are great questions. I mean, what's their authority? What's their ability? And the answer is they have a lot of authority, and they're hooking up with the right people.
So we actually have a light at the end of the tunnel there.
Yeah.
Oh, sure we do. Mm-hmm.
Which
I'm
is
more
very
encouraged now
encouraging,
than I've ever been in this.
And the healthcare district meets the fourth Tuesday of every month. I just looked on the calendar, so that would be the 24th of this month.
Where
That's right, at
Yeah,
6:30 at the big clinic that they built on the
Okay.
corner of Washington and Northcrest, the Wellness Center.
The wellness center right there in the meeting room they have on the back
That's
side
right.
there.
They
Okay.
meet on the east end of the building.
So if you would like to keep on top of this, keep on top of the developments in the healthcare district, then by all means, find out the time. You said the time.
6:30.
6:30.
Well, it'd be interesting if the local population could bring some pressure to bear
Yeah.
on the healthcare board to give them the green light basically to go for some of these projects.
Will you be attending that meeting?
If I'm in town, I will. I have a son who is going to college, and I might have to transport him far away.
And every time he comes back to visit, I hear about how happy the Madrigals are to have his voice back in amongst them when he comes and sings.
Very kind. Glenn, if you're listening, that's you.
That is you, Glenn, exactly. The Madrigals miss you desperately, by the way. Okay, so yeah, healthcare district meeting. That's the 24th of this month at the Wellness Center in the conference room back there at 6:30, and that sounds. I really like that. I mean, yeah, there's a light. So there is a light at the end of this tunnel. I had no idea, and that's
terrific.
That is.
The other question I had, we spoke about it before we came on the air, and it basically was, what does the Affordable Care Act do for this community, and with respect to how it affects Sutter Coast's application of their program on our healthcare delivery here.
Yeah, and this is one of the rare things I think that me and the Sutter Health executives all agree on. It's been very beneficial to Sutter Health System because you've taken people that were non-insured previously and really couldn't pay for any care, and you've insured them, maybe 20, 25 million people. So the ACA has been very good to Sutter, and that's probably one reason why the $10.8 million profits showed up in 2014, which is larger than their traditional yearly profit.
So it helps Sutter Health. How does that help the local community?
Well, it was one reason why. I mean, if their profitability turned around because of the Affordable Health Care Act, I mean, that takes the pressure off of them, whatever corporate pressure they might have had, bottom line pressure to downsize.
Yeah, I think it did, and I brought this up in the boardroom because, of course, we all knew the ACA was coming. It had been passed, long since, and I said to the rest of the board, before we cut 50% of our beds from service, before we triple charges on local Medicare patients, and before we enact restrictions on how long a patient can stay in this hospital, why don't we first get a chief financial officer and start operating legally? And then why don't we see what the impact of the ACA is? Mm-hmm. Because critical access is a hard thing to undo. It can be done, but it's hard. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're taking away a lot of your key staff. I mean, there's so many things about it beyond just the application process. Linda Horn, the former CEO, said it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to undo. And the answer I got from Linda Horn is things are going to get worse under the ACA. This is what she told me. I said, Linda, that's not what the national articles on it are saying, and that's certainly not what happened. As we just said, it actually was very helpful to healthcare systems because people that were uninsured became insured. But for whatever reason, I didn't prevail in that vote. I was the only person that voted to not convert to critical access. But thanks to the community, thanks to people like this radio station and all of you asking the questions, we're not critical access. And we'll see what the future brings with the ACA. But in general, if you're in the healthcare business and you can take people that didn't used to have insurance and insure them, especially at hospitals, it's a good thing.
But it seems to me that Sutter Health has taken advantage of that situation and in the process have made the cost of healthcare here locally. Granted, a lot of times it's covered by various insurance programs and the taxpayer in the form of Medicare and Medi-Cal, but it seems to me like if it was such a boon to Sutter Health, they wouldn't have to make such extreme raises in prices for their services.
Well, that's right. And even before the ACA, Sutter Health charges have been the subject of national attention. Sutter Health has 7 of California's 10 most expensive hospitals. Sutter's charges, according to a union trust fund that pays the bills, are 60% over market averages.
Wow. One
union trust fund sent a letter to its members saying that just because our members went to Sutter hospitals instead of non-Sutter hospitals, we wasted $5 million of your union trust funds in 1 year.
So how do they get away with that?
Well, ultimately, it's an antitrust issue, and that's actually being litigated right now in San Francisco by a union trust fund, the United Commercial Food Workers Employee Benefit Trust. And union trust funds are the funds that union employees pay money into to pay the health care bills. And so they're litigating Sutter down in San Francisco court. And Sutter initially tried to put the litigation into arbitration. They tried to sort of bottle it up in arbitration, but they lost. And now it's come back out of arbitration, and there was a dismissal hearing about a week ago. I don't know the outcome of that. But there have been a number of antitrust actions filed against Sutter Health, and I think, ultimately, one of them will prevail. It's just a matter of when.
So in essence, it seems like Sutter Coast, or Sutter Health rather, has got themselves in a whole lot of hot water. Is it possible that that reaches a level that they would consider letting us loose, or are we so important to their structure that we have to be in that pool?
That's a great question. I'll tell you what another healthcare executive told me, and that is we're not that important to their structure. If it becomes an issue of Sutter Coast Hospital in Crescent City jeopardizing the outcome of an antitrust lawsuit against Sutter Health, they'll be happy to see us go.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any doubt.
That's another possible
It sure
way
is.
for us to go.
Yeah. I'm following that litigation because that's a really important point you just brought up.
Because we could pick up another healthcare provider in that instance, and there wouldn't have to be this two-way street that you're talking about earlier, where you're putting together a whole nother surgery center and a whole nother.
Right. I mean, what you want to do is have efficient health care.
Exactly.
So you can lower the prices. You don't want to build another facility that's directly competing with one, 2 blocks away. But when people are coming into my office and saying, will you please do my surgery in Humboldt County so you can lower my out-of-pocket charges, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, quite frankly, we don't have the population nor the economic wherewithal to be able to handle something like that. It's bad enough that so much of our money spent on health care goes out of the county, and we don't see any benefit from that money particularly. But if we could, somehow retain some of that money here.
I don't know. Sutter brings money into the county. I'm just looking at the full-page ad in the triplicate.
Yeah.
And I know what a full-page ad in the triplicate costs, so that's not. And in full disclosure, Sutter Health is an underwriter of KFUG to the tune of $1,200 a year. For $100 a month, we play a couple of announcements, some of their canned announcements that you'll hear on KCRE and KPOD as well. So I just want to say that there while we're saying all these things against Sutter. But yeah, that went to. Well, I was going to say a local business, but the triplicate isn't really a local business.
When I was,
That's not true.
I'll tell a quick story about advertising. When I was on the board of directors, I noticed a significant jump in the number of newspaper and radio ads coming from Sutter Coast Hospital. So I'm on the hospital board. I'm supposed to be connected at some point to these decisions. And the law says, and the bylaws say, I have the absolute right to look at the hospital budget. So I went to the public relations director and said, I'd like to see the budget for advertising. And they refused to give it to me. So she went to, I believe it was Mike Cohill. It was either him or the attorney. I'm pretty sure it was Mike Cohill. He's basically said, don't give Duncan anything. Is it better?
I'm trying to imagine just the look on the person's face when they see you walk through the door. They are at HR, and you come walking, and oh, here comes Dr. Duncan again.
Well, there were some tense moments, but I tried as much as I could to keep it light, and I really think one day all of us, at least all of us locally, I'm not sure there'll ever be a day where the Sutter Health executives come back and we all sit in the same room, but I really think all the local people will one day. We'll get past this. That's how we're going to win.
Yeah, that's amazing. So once again, the healthcare district meeting coming up on the 24th at 6:30 at the Wellness Center out there. Sounds like an important meeting. Maybe one you can go get involved in and register your opinion with these folks and perhaps reach that light at the end of this tunnel.
Well, it looks like we have maybe 2 avenues to reach that light. So. That's really encouraging.
I know. That's amazing. I had no idea.
The other thing that's kind of interesting is when we're talking about advertising, and it's been my experience, at least in the past, that when you see a company that's trying to polish their apple, so to speak, that it's a pretty common practice for advertisements and in all forms of media throughout the community to suddenly appear.
Oh yeah. No, I knew that's what they were doing when they
kind of almost make you want to take a step back. And
well,
say,
but I don't know if I don't know if I stress this enough. It's $1,200 a year, Sam.
Absolutely, I understand that.
Well, you should know the Camden study was roughly $200,000, and it was ultimately discredited in a 10-0 vote of the Board of Supervisors and the City Council of Crescent City, who found that the financial projections and the patient census projections were unreliable. So that there went $200,000. And the reason it's important is that reflects in your charges ultimately, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's about $185 a minute under general anesthesia to have surgery at Sutter Coast.
185
a minute. Yeah,
Wow.
and actually I'll tell a quick story. So sometimes, people will drop something on the floor. I had one day a year ago, someone had sterilized a sterilization tray, but the lid was loose, so we couldn't use it. In other words, we had to re-sterilize it. That's 20 minutes.
Oh.
20 minutes at $185 a minute. So I asked,
$2,500.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just not fair to people. When you're paying 20% of that, and even if you're not, somebody's paying it. Medicare.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody's paying for that. So I went to the operating room director and said, we need to take that time off. I mean, all it means is you just subtract 20 minutes from the patient's bill. That's it. And she said, no, we won't do that. That's a conflict of interest. And I said, no, that's the truth, and we're going to do that.
Wow.
She's no longer at the hospital. They've replaced her. But this is the kind of thing that drives me crazy, when you take advantage of somebody and you won't do the right thing, especially in a working town like this. I mean, I've seen a lot of people face medical bankruptcies. We work with a lot of those people. I mean, we will waive charges, for people or make arrangements or whatever it takes. And, Sutter turned my office manager over to collections because she didn't have $300 a month to pay on her hospital bill. I mean, she had $100 a month, and they said, no, it's $300, you go to collections. She said, I have $100. So they turned her over to collections, and then the collections agency charged $189 finance charge, and she's still paying $100 a month because that's what she has. I mean, that is not appropriate for a charity, in my view.
Yeah.
So I've given you some anecdotes. I do have, can I say one quote?
Please.
From a famous person. I won't say who it is until after the quote. I'll let people think about it. It says, this is kind of what motivates me. People out there saying, what's that crazy doctor up to? Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. So some of you may already know this, but that's Martin Luther King.
Wow. Dr. Duncan, thank you. Is there anything you'd like to I mean, that's a strong finish. So I don't know if you have something that you'd like to add after that.
I think more than anything, I'd like to thank the community. I can't go anywhere without people saying thanks. That helps.
Yeah, definitely. Sam, anything?
You've become a household name in the community.
Yes.
And in point of fact, it seemed like it took a majority of the community to come to your aid to get this thing to happen. And now today you've offered us some hope that we may not have to continue with this agony that we're going through.
And I think time will prove you to be correct.
One would hope so. I mean, the whole point of this radio station is to offer some sort of solution to the problems that we have in this community, and solutions that actually work instead of just being kind of papering over a hole in the wall and hoping it all goes away.
Technically, the purpose of this radio station is to offer a venue for other voices, and for voices to be heard, voices that you wouldn't ordinarily find on the limited media that we have in this small community. And one of those voices belongs to Sutter Health. And since they're one of our underwriters, and we've been spending an hour plus bashing them, I'm going to play one of their underwriting announcements right now. That's what KFUG's about. Irony.
Fair enough. I fully appreciate that, and
because I don't know if I stressed it enough. It's $1,200 a year that they get. So we'll be back in just a couple of minutes to wrap up Sunday afternoon hymns and conversation. Thank you.
Today's broadcast underwritten in part by Sutter Health.
Sutter Coast Community Clinic, located directly behind Sutter Coast Hospital in Crescent City, is proud to offer you and your family primary and specialty care. We have a full-service OB/GYN department, internal medicine, as well as surgical services that include general surgery and urology. Sutter Coast Community Clinic in Crescent City. To schedule an appointment, please call us or visit us online at suttercoast.org. Sutter Health, we plus you.
Thanks for supporting community radio. Thanks for supporting KFUG.
KFUG would like to thank new underwriters, Port O'Pints Brewery, Tidal Wave 101, Ocean World, and licensed massage therapist Jamie Wielden. Thank you for supporting KFUG.
Life is busy and fast. It can be difficult to take your favorite community radio station with you on your daily adventures of daring do. Well, fret no more, radio listeners. Now you can take KFUG along with you on your mobile device of choice, thanks to TuneIn.com. Simply go to tunein.com, download the free and safe app, look up KFUG in their directory, and away you go. Community Radio Bliss. TuneIn.com lets you take KFUG with you wherever you go. Community radio for Crescent City, Del Norte, and now, truly, beyond KFUG.